Do you have a piece of media, be it TV, movie, music, or in this case, anime, that you revisit every year? Something about it just pulls you back in. It brings you a comfort to your tired soul. For me, wintertime with its crisp air and warm tea always brings me back to Shin-Chan.
1, 2, 3.
If you don't know what Shin-Chan is, I'm sure you've seen images of the titular Shin. Starting in 1992, with 1,020 episodes at the time of writing and still ongoing to this day, you can definitely call Shin, his family, and his friends iconic. Shin-Chan consists of episodic slice-of-life stories involving all kinds of antics, be it learning kendo with this homeless guy, or fighting crime with his homeroom teacher. However, it's not the normal Japanese Shin-Chan that we've been yearning to watch.
We've been watching a different version, a darker version, the kind of anime you'd hide from your children and loved ones.
Come and play with me, Penny.
For us English speakers, you have 4 whole options if you want to watch it dubbed. The Villeto and Fuzz dub, produced in California through 2001 to 2003. Next you have the LUK International dub, produced in Hong Kong, and the South Korean English dub. If you want a faithful adaptation of the original, check these out. But that's not what we wanted. This is what we wanted.
What's wrong with Viagra and Action Bastard Tighties?
Miss, you alright? You want me to punch him in the junk?
You mean you're going to start injecting heroin?
Someone's at the door. Probably some ghetto kid selling candy.
Wow, a kiss! That's like the best thing a girl can blow!
Tell me what I am, you blind past your prime trick.
Right, kid, let's show this flame-broiled bitch who's boss.
Please, miss, don't go in there. They're nothing but low-class trash, Walmart shoppers, coupon clippers, they even watch Oprah.
You've caused me so much pain, it's made an anger and despair mark over my head. Look at it!
Mommy!
Man, I love the early 2000s dubbing scene. As I'm sure you've guessed, much like the infamous Ghost Stories dub, this isn't very faithful to the original. Starting in 2006, the Funimation dub reorders, reimagines, and recreates the show from the ground up. I remember being shown clips from this dub when I was a child, and something about them just stuck with me. I've tried to find and watch the show on multiple occasions, but it's surprisingly hard to find anywhere. Funimation seems to have dropped it from their library, and the oh-so-sweet pirate sites often don't have it either. Maybe I just missed it, but it's not that easy to find. I think this partially has to do with how many dubs there are. When looking for it, you'll very often come across the other 3. And while they're fun in their own right, there's nothing quite like a mother telling their child they can't have pocket money because they'll spend it on
trading cards, video games, and crystal meth.
The episodes are completely out of order from the Japanese, and that's okay. They concocted a Frankenstein's monster of episodes and somehow created a really compelling story with its own continuity. Alongside the jokes, the story is extremely Americanized. Shin goes to the Happy Fun Time American School in Japan, and the writers use this to explain why the characters are up to date on, at the time, current American politics, and why some of the characters' names have been changed. As far as I know, not very much was off limits for the writing team.
Looks like another trampy Americans moved here.
All they had to do was keep the original dynamics the same, and everything else was up to them. What self-respecting up-and-coming comedy writers in the mid-2000s wouldn't take this opportunity to go wild? There is quite a big cast of characters, but let's go over our main guys. First off, you have Shin, the perverted oldest child of the Nohara family. The rest of the family are Hima, Shin's younger sister, Hiro, the sad dad perpetually stuck in a soul-crushing job selling cutlery, and Mitzi, Shin's foil, and the mother who's painstakingly keeping the family in check. A pretty standard Simpsons-style family dynamic. Shin's friends at school are even more fun. You have Georgie Herbert Walker Prescott III, or Georgie for short, a far-right Republican child from a well-off family.
You'll have to move on to blackmail. Do you know any secrets she's keeping? Drugs, drunken sex parties?
Penny, the aggressive leader of their group with a terrible family life.
Stupid fantasy bullcrap! Stupid widow!
Masao, the token gay character. And, Boo, the special needs child who can talk to rocks.
The power of cucumber compels you.
You also have the teachers at the Happy Fun Time American School. You have Ench, the half Peruvian, half gypsy principal of the school with a complicated past, and Miss Polly, the kinky nymphomaniac, just to name a few.
The humor in this show is not what I would call safe for work, so if you're not up for that, the show probably isn't for you. But for those of us who want to be thrust back into the mid-2000s, this show has got you covered. From Obama vs. Clinton to VHS tapes, it's a blast from the past. You'll especially enjoy the family dynamics if you grew up working class. The show oozes nostalgia and relatability. For some reason, watching troubled characters struggling but still being happy just fills me with positivity. Everything is run down, the walls and floors are dirty, and the economy is in shambles. But what can you do? might as well enjoy what you have. The original Shin-Chan's childhood serenity is replaced with a grunge that feels oh so familiar. To us, personally, the writing is top-notch with its characterization and creativity. For instance,
Action, bastard! Bastard beam!
it's simple, it's rough but it's welcoming, and it's nostalgic. They know what they're making and have as much fun as they can doing it. I don't know if it's just the nostalgia, but Shin and his family bring this perfect warmth. The humour is fantastically unique, with quick one-liners and references being par for the course. But the gags and ongoing jokes really keep you watching. You never know how far the writers are willing to push the line, and you'll never guess what topics they're gonna cover next. A great example is the undercover cops plotline. Early on in the show, Shin blows up their house and they have to move into the falling apartments. One episode, two guys move in next door, and Shin, being his nosy self, barges into their house, forcing them to create a cover story. Through their short appearance on the show, the lie gets deeper and deeper. It's a simple joke, but I really enjoy the situations the characters end up in.
I'm gay alright, but my partner here is the gayest gay that ever did gay.
Good for you guys.
Today on Vampire Mobsters.
It was so clear the team loved working on this show. I wanted to push the storytelling as far as they could. After we finished the season, of course we had to watch the commentary videos. It was in these commentaries we discovered the original plotline for the undercover cops was supposed to be a father-son duo. The change to a budding gay romance was so well written for the early 2000s, and made for a well-rounded running gag the few times they come back over the seasons. It's not just the writing that changed. The editors intentionally roughed up the characters and environments, adding marks and scratches to everything. This makes the show take on a grungier feel visually, matching it with the more mature stories and voice acting. One of our favourite things to do while watching basically anything is to pause and discuss it for sometimes hours at a time, and we did that for Shin-Chan a lot. One of the topics that came up so often is, why is this show so good?
I'd seen the odd clip here or there years before, so I wondered if it might be nostalgia.
But I had never seen it before and found it equally enjoyable. From this, we tried to break down what exactly about it appealed to us. And the main conclusion we came to was that the sincerity behind creating a bastardized children's show provided the perfect mix of comfort and humour. It's soft in a way a lot of contemporary shows aren't allowed to be. Ever since Game of Thrones, edgy grimdark has been the name of the game. The sitcom seems to be dying out, but even then they only discuss adults. Seeing the gentle drama between children with almost no stakes is a fun contrast to the adult humour. It's also just so well written, all the jokes hit just right. There's also something timeless about the pre-social media era. By season 3, it was 2011, and with mentions of Facebook, it was actually a worse experience, but still pretty good.
Money makes life happy.
This video was sponsored by the Merikiwi Corporation. By watching this video, viewers may experience wanting to watch Shin-Chan, interest in Merikiwi, wanting to subscribe to our Patreon, feelings of hunger towards small animals, a strong desire to like this video, insomnia, a strong desire to watch our other videos, wanting to subscribe to our Patreon, a newfound interest in cats, long walks on the beach, and our Patreon. Continue watching for the cure.
It's not just Shin-Chan that elicits this nostalgic feeling though. Ghost Stories is another famous dub for how raunchy and different it is from the source material, and that also gives it a similar relaxing feeling. It's almost a nostalgia for both of us, who we are now and who we were. A double whammy of yearning. Seeing something we could have experienced and something we are currently experiencing.
It puts me in mind of Black Books, which is a British comedy slice of life about Bernard Black, a man who owns a bookshop, his unfortunate employee Manny, and the owner of the shop next door, Fran. They're all dysfunctional adults who barely scrape by, and each episode returns them to their equilibrium of misery. For me, it's particularly nostalgic as I watched it when I was younger.
But for me, Black Books almost seems aspirational. The freedom they have just by scraping by becomes more and more relatable as we try to become full-time YouTubers. We've been at this for over a year now, and Merikiwi is neither of our first channels, but we will keep on trying. It's just comforting to see characters who aren't the best at their job, they aren't the nicest, they aren't special, they're just people living their lives through the good and the bad. When I start thinking about stories about people just living their lives, I always end up back at Bell Peppers and Beef with no beef. The first episode of Cowboy Bebop. If you haven't seen it, I won't spoil it, but the plot of the first episode, roughly, is that the two main characters, Jet and Spike, are too poor to afford meat, so they take on a bounty hunting job and go on a grand adventure, but at the end of all their hard work, They aren't any richer and still can't afford any beef. Another example is the episode of Space Dandy, where the crew visit Meowth's family and end up getting stuck in a time loop of the mundane. It's somehow comforting to see larger-than-life characters living normal lives. It's the antithesis of the isekai farmer living the perfect conflict-free farm life. Something about sci-fi really lends itself to down-to-earth relatable stories, where a lot of fantasy anime tend to have a veneer of harmony, or in Western fantasy an abstract cleanliness despite political drama. Sci-fi finds itself more in touch with dystopia. Smaller-scale, human-driven stories about how much it can suck to be a little guy caught in a large and confusing world. These aren't absolutes, of course, but it's certainly a pattern. For instance, Star Wars has a more fantasy-style approach to the characters, where they're representatives of some archetype. A lot of the flack the live-action Cowboy Bebop got was in only emulating the visual grunge, but erasing the narrative grunge. A corrupt police department becomes one wayward guy. Things are mostly okay, and that robs it of its bite and ability to address those more relatable issues of poverty and social injustice. Without that realism, when the characters do have to face more mundane struggles like affording a basic meal, it just doesn't feel right.
As we mentioned earlier, the show is full of rude and inappropriate jokes aimed towards an adult American audience. Very fitting considering it aired on Adult Swim. I know we're English, but we grew up on a lot of American TV, so that early 2000s pop culture is just as ingrained in our brains as English pop culture. But in the modern landscape, some of the jokes aren't so well received. Let's talk about it. Casual use of cocaine, prostitutes, and other taboos is strictly forbidden in most modern comedy shows, or is relegated to the tier of family dad American guy teenage gross-out humor. This may be controversial, but even though I do enjoy those shows, I think the parody of Shin-Chan is elevated to something much more sincere. Maybe if it went on for 20 years it would degrade the same way, but there's definitely love and passion in the comedy here, and part of that is making jokes that a bunch of cringe 20-somethings would. Not to go on some tirade about the death of comedy or whatever. The expectations have definitely shifted, for some better and some worse reasons. A general theme in what we talk about on this channel, at least in the background, is this idea of an erosion of spaces we once called home. A lot of stuff has been smoothed out and made palatable to a general audience, but these were niche spaces for less mainstream people, and it just feels harder and harder to find that again. There's a time and a place for offensive humor, and there is definitely a place for it. Much like with violence and sexual content, it can help temper our expectations and emotional responses to things. Knowing where that line is for you is a good source of personal awareness. If you're always watching things in your circle of comfort, you may inadvertently shrink what you're comfortable with. And that's when you get people confused and upset that media for adults has sex or horror films are scary. Of course this airs into something else too. As a cringe hipster, I do genuinely find a little sadness in the things I love going mainstream, because I know they'll be disassembled in front of my eyes and made into some generic mush of normality. Not necessarily by the creator, but definitely by the audience. Those fan spaces are now policed and mangled by strangers who feel like they have a right to dictate how you enjoy things, to your face. Small jokes on a tweet can blow up into an argument because you can't just ignore someone having a different opinion near you, or it counts as you supporting that person. It's tense and hostile to creativity. These people were not the audience for these things, but here they are, confused and annoyed at genre expectations the rest of us were there for in the first place. I'd rather people be as disgusting as they want, and if you don't like that, you can just ignore them and do your own thing. That other people will also definitely hate. But maybe, for a few brief moments, you'll come together to share in the joy without someone tapping on your shoulder to tell you, actually that person likes a problematic ship, so you shouldn't talk to them. But back to Shin-Chan.
So why do we feel such strong nostalgia towards this show, despite only one of us having watched a little in the past? Well, for a start, it was already nostalgic for us at the time of watching, talking about events some half a decade or over a decade before watching. The style as well is more like the anime we thought were cartoons as children, like Hamtaro or Zatch Bell. So that's another grain of nostalgia. And then the actual events and characters are very reminiscent of both of our childhoods. While not necessarily poverty, we had everything we needed, but there was a struggle and a worry we were aware other people didn't have. For me, the mid-2000s edgy humor brings me back to a time when I would stay up past my bedtime and watch reruns of Bo 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 and Beautiful Joe at my grandmother's. The small CRTV that was definitely outdated, the large armchairs with their horrible pans that I just sank into, watching things I absolutely should not have been.
And for me, I have an immature sense of humour and find cheap jokes about sex and violence the pinnacle of comedy. The simple format of each story is easily digestible, and in that subtle openness, you can assume and unassume so many things that a heavier story wouldn't allow. Almost on a horseshoe from the annoying lightness of teenager issues in shonen and shoujo, the utter lack of stakes that affect these 5-year-olds is just nice. And finally, I think on a more meta level, knowing this was early on in so many famous English dub actors' careers has this very sweet nostalgia of peering behind the curtain and knowing there is just so much more to come, especially with the voices of Laura Bailey and Monica Rial, who are pretty damn famous now. It reminds me of when I recently rewatched Stardust and realized the shithead hometown antagonist is Henry Cavill of all people. It's sort of like gap moe, a term I'm sure all of you are entirely familiar with. What? No one's used that term for like 10 years? Okay, so it's like Zetai Ryoki, but for personality. No one uses that either anymore. Ah, fuck. Okay, so you know how you like see a really cute girl and it turns out she fucking loves cringe teenage comedy and it just makes you kind of fall in love for a little bit in the aisle of a discount DVD shop? Yeah, it's like that.
So that's why we adore Shin-Chan when so many others only see it as the outrageous redub on par with Ghost Stories. Although for that too, we feel this way. Like we said, it's not all bad that some of that humour was left in the past, but the fact that almost none of it exists today is a little sad. Or at least, that has been done well. People often say a show like this couldn't be made today as a positive statement, but we think it's a negative. Shows like the Shin-Chan Funimation dub, Ghost Stories, and the Boondocks did a lot more than just be outrageous. They had ideas they wanted to express and stories they wanted to tell, and at the end of all of this was something an artist wanted other people to hear, and I think that means it has some value. It's just on us if we're willing or wanting to receive that value. So if you want a relaxing, familiar feeling show to throw on in the background while you're huddling for warmth under blankets, nothing beats a little bit of Shin-Chan. It's so hard for me to describe the feelings Shin-Chan elicits in me, and that's why this video has been well over a year in the making. We just couldn't find the right words to describe those feelings, and to some extent I still don't know how to describe them. Maybe in the future when I'm a better writer, I'll be able to properly express my thoughts on this topic. But for now, you'll just have to enjoy my baby steps. Speaking of our baby steps, go check out our Patreon if you want to support our baby channel. A like and a subscribe would also be awesome if you feel so inclined, and we'll see you all next time. Especially you, Darren. Bye!